I didn't plan to tell anyone about that night. Honestly, I would have preferred to forget it. But some things don't dissolve with time. They stay exactly where they happened, like a bruise under your ribs, reminding you of the moment someone decided you were small. So here it is. The truth of how one sentence at a company dinner almost broke me, and how the way I reacted changed everything after. My boss, Richard, had invited me to a small, casual dinner. That's what he called it. What he didn't mention was that this wasn't for our team. It was for his people. His level. Directors, senior managers, the kind who talk with their hands and laugh with their teeth. I'm not one of them. I'm just a guy who works quietly, shows up early, misses no deadlines, and blends into the beige-colored walls of our office. But when your boss invites you, you go. The restaurant looked like the kind of place where the plates cost more than my weekly groceries. Dim lights, tall glasses, chairs that felt too soft, like they expected you to say something impressive the moment you sat down. I remember walking in behind Richard and immediately realizing I didn't belong there. Everyone else already knew each other, not by work, but by the way people know each other when they've shared vacations, investments, divorces, rumors. I took the seat at the far end of the table, hoping to disappear the way I usually do. No such luck. The guy across from me, Mark, one of Richard's closest colleagues, spotted me the moment I tried to shrink into my chair. He had the kind of confidence men get when life has never told them no. Perfect teeth, loud laugh, watch that probably cost my rent and then some. He eyed me like I was a curiosity. So what's your name again? He asked, already smirking. Daniel, I said. Right, right. Quiet, Daniel. Richard's little shadow. A few people chuckled. Not loud, but enough. I felt my jaw tighten. I tried to focus on the menu, pretend I didn't hear. The conversation moved on, or at least they pretended it did. But every few minutes, I'd feel Mark's eyes slide back to me, like he was waiting for the perfect moment to poke again. I've dealt with men like him before. Men who only feel tall when someone else is made small. The food arrived. Everyone drank, talked, laughed louder with every refill. I stayed quiet, stuck between wanting to survive unnoticed and wanting to walk out. Then, during a round of so-called fun stories, when everyone was already buzzing and bold, Mark leaned back, swirling his drink, and looked at me with that same sharp smile. So, Daniel, he said, loud enough that even the servers paused mid-step, tell me something. How does it feel to be a loser? The table went silent. For a second I thought I misheard him. But no, he meant it. His eyes were steady, waiting to see how deep the blade would go. Richard froze beside him, jaw clenched, pretending to cough instead of intervening. And everyone else, every single person, stared at me like I was the evening's entertainment. My chest burned. I felt the air in the room shift, heavy enough to choke on. I wasn't angry, I wasn't embarrassed, not exactly. What I felt was detached, like I was watching myself from outside my own body, watching this pathetic scene unfold as if it were happening to somebody else. Mark laughed, a short, sharp sound. Come on, he said. I'm asking seriously. What's it like being at the table with real players for once? A few people laughed, softly. The coward's laugh. I should have defended myself. I should have said something. Anything. But I didn't. That's the part I still replay sometimes. I didn't raise my voice or slam my fist or even stand up. I just looked at him. Really looked. And something inside me clicked. Not anger, not shame. Just clarity. I smiled. A small, controlled smile. The kind that makes people nervous because they can't read it. Mark blinked. Just once. Like the script in his head suddenly skipped a line. I picked up my glass, took a sip, and said nothing. Silence spread across the table. Uncomfortable and sticky. The kind that stretches longer than it should because someone expected a reaction and didn't get one. Mark scoffed, trying to reclaim his dominance, but he'd already lost the rhythm. He was expecting a punch or tears, or at least a stutter. He got neither. And while everyone else eventually forced the conversation forward, pretending nothing had happened, I noticed something they didn't. At the far end of the table, slightly turned away from the group, sat a man I'd barely noticed when I first arrived. Tall, calm, not talking much, just observing. He wasn't laughing, he wasn't drinking, he wasn't avoiding eye contact. He was simply watching the scene with a focus that felt intentional. He didn't smile at my silence. He didn't frown either. He just watched Mark, then me, then Mark again, as if collecting pieces. And then his eyes met mine, steady, unreadable, but not unkind. That moment lasted less than a second, but it changed everything that came after. When the dinner ended and everyone spilled into the cold night, I kept replaying that look, that strange, quiet acknowledgement, because as humiliating as the evening was, as heavy as it sat in my stomach, something about that man's expression told me one thing with absolute certainty. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The hangover I woke up with the next morning had nothing to do with alcohol. I'd only had one drink. It was the kind of heaviness you feel behind your eyes when your brain has spent the whole night replaying the same 15 seconds in high definition. How does it feel to be a loser? I brushed my teeth and heard it again. Pulled on a shirt and heard the little burst of laughter after it. Tied my shoes and saw Mark's face, the way he leaned back in his chair like he was tossing scraps to a dog. I almost called in sick. Almost. But then I pictured the office whispers. He didn't show up after that dinner, did you hear? I'm not dramatic. I don't like becoming anyone's story. So I grabbed my bag, locked the door, and drove in. The office looked exactly the same as every morning. Gray carpets, humming lights, the faint smell of burnt coffee. It's weird how the world doesn't pause to honor your private humiliation. Printers still jam, elevators still ding, people still complain about the weather like nothing else is happening. At my desk, there was a sticky note on my monitor. Richard wants you in the conference room. 9:00. Jenna, I checked the time. 8:54. Of course. Richard was already in the room when I walked in, standing by the window with a paper cup in his hand. No suit jacket, just a white shirt with the sleeves rolled. Casual damage control. Morning, Daniel, he said without turning. Close the door, would you? I did. He let the silence sit for a moment, then finally looked at me. About last night, he started. I waited. Things got carried away. You know how it is when people drink and start joking around? Joking. Right. I watched his face carefully. He wasn't embarrassed for me. He was embarrassed for himself. For the optics. For being the boss who let one of his people get humiliated at his table. Mark can be a bit much, he added. But he's important. He brings in big contracts. We don't want to make a thing out of this. There already was a thing, I said. He made it in front of everyone. Richard's eyes narrowed slightly, not angry, just calculating. And you handled it well, he said quickly. You stayed calm. That's what matters. Let's not escalate. It's better for you if we keep it light. Better for me? I felt something sour rise in my throat. So what exactly are we keeping light? I asked. Him calling me a loser, or you pretending you didn't hear it? He flinched at that, just a fraction, then forced a tight smile. Look, I'm on your side here, he said, but you have to understand how hierarchy works. People at that level, they joke differently. They test people. If you react badly, it reflects on you. If you brush it off, they respect that. I thought about Mark's face, about the way he'd stared at me waiting for a reaction. I brushed it off, I said. He laughed. Everyone watched. What respect did I miss? Richard didn't have an answer to that. He stared at his coffee instead. Just focus on your work, he finally said. I'll talk to Mark informally, off the record. In the meantime, let's both move on, all right? He was asking me to swallow it, to file it under office banter and pretend it didn't scrape my ribs every time I breathed. I'll move on, I said, but I won't forget. I saw a flicker of annoyance in his eyes then, not at Mark, at me, for not playing the grateful subordinate who says, thank you for being told to absorb the hit in silence. The meeting ended with some vague remarks about the upcoming quarterly review. I walked out with a knot in my chest that felt tighter than when I'd walked in. By mid-morning, the whispers started. I overheard them in fragments near the printer, by the kitchen, in the corridor. Did you hear what he said to Daniel? Apparently he just sat there. I would have walked out. They weren't talking about Mark. They were talking about me, about my reaction or lack of it, about the fact that I hadn't performed outrage on cue. It's funny. You can be invisible for years, and one moment of humiliation shines more light on you than all your hard work combined. Around noon, I was buried in a spreadsheet when Jenna appeared by my desk, holding a folder she didn't need to be holding. "Hey," she said softly. "Got a minute?" She was at the dinner too, invited as Richard's project lead. She'd been 2 seats down, close enough to hear everything, far enough to pretend she hadn't. We stepped into a small meeting room. She closed the door, but not fully, just enough for sound to be swallowed. "I heard Richard talk to you," she said. "He did," I replied. And he wants me to treat it like a joke that went too far? Smile, nod, keep my head down, you know the drill." Jenna pressed her lips together. "For what it's worth," she said. "I thought you handled it better than most. If you'd snapped, they would have called you emotional. If you'd walked out, they would have called you unstable. This way, you made him look worse than you." I shrugged. It still felt like I was the one on display, I said. "You were," she answered, "but somebody else was watching too." She said it casually, but my attention sharpened. "You saw him, right?" she added. "At the end of the table. The guy in the dark jacket, quiet, barely said a word." I nodded. "Who is he?" I asked. She hesitated like she was deciding how much she was allowed to tell me. "Name's Adrian Cole," she said finally. "He's from corporate, higher than Richard. They brought him in for the strategic restructuring. He's basically the one who decides who gets promoted and who gets moved out." The room felt smaller for a second. "So he watched that whole thing," I said slowly, and said nothing. "Yeah," Jenna replied, "but he watched everything. That's what he does. Signs the papers after he figures out who people really are." I thought back to the moment our eyes met, the stillness in his expression, the way he'd looked between Mark and me like measuring something only he understood. "I wouldn't obsess over it," Jenna added quickly. "Just be aware." She left with the same folders she'd brought in, and I went back to my desk. The spreadsheet in front of me blurred into meaningless numbers. In the afternoon, Richard called a quick team huddle to discuss deadlines. Mark joined via video from another floor, all charm and confidence, acting like nothing had happened. At the end of the call, he laughed and said, "Make sure Daniel doesn't drown in those reports. He looks like he needs floaties." People smiled nervously. Richard didn't say a word. I muted my mic. "Isn't that what losers do?" Mark added with a grin. I unmated, looked straight into the camera, and replied calmly, "Funny thing about losers, sometimes they're just people who stop to playing the games you're good at." He blinked. The call ended a few seconds later, but not before I saw Jenna's small, quick smile in the corner of my screen. It wasn't much, but it was something. A tiny shift, a line drawn in pencil instead of ink, but a line nonetheless. That night, I didn't replay the dinner in my head. I replayed something else. The look on Mark's face when I answered him without raising my voice, and the quiet way Adrian Cole had watched the entire performance at that restaurant, like it was data. I still thought it was just about one man's bad joke and my pride. I had no idea it was about to become evidence. I didn't notice the shift right away. It didn't announce itself with thunder or a slammed door. It came quietly, the way storms do when the sky still looks harmless. 2 days after the team call, Richard sent out an email titled Departmental Alignment Review, Mandatory Attendance. Those words usually meant long presentations about budgets, notepads filled with phrases like synergy, and people pretending to care. But this time there was something underneath the words. A tension, a weight, and then I noticed the sender copied. Adrian Cole. He wasn't an observer anymore. He was stepping into the room. By lunchtime, whispers ran through the office like static. I heard their restructuring again. Someone screwed up a contract. Big numbers. Was it accounting? Operations? No idea, but someone's getting cut. Most people looked nervous. Mark, on the other hand, looked irritated that people were talking about something other than him. He strolled around the office like he was immune to consequences. Maybe he believed he was. Men like him usually do. At 3 p.m., the meeting started. Adrian stood at the front of the conference room, not with a stack of notes, but with a single tablet in his hand. No anxiety, no wasted movement. He wasn't the kind of man who explained himself. He was the kind who let people reveal themselves. "We're conducting a review of contract authorizations," he said. "Some inconsistencies were flagged in our audit." His voice wasn't loud, yet somehow it filled the room. "And we'll be asking several individuals for clarifications." I saw the flicker in Mark's expression then. Small, but real. A shift in his jaw, a tightening of his throat, like he suddenly knew something was about to surface. Adrian continued. "These inconsistencies involve signatures, approval timestamps, and discrepancies in reported vendor costs. We're determining whether this is a systems issue." He paused, "or a human one." The room felt colder. Richard cleared his throat. "Just to be clear, this won't disrupt ongoing projects. We're simply—" Adrian didn't look at him. "This will take as long as necessary." Richard shut his mouth. Names were called. People stood, answered questions, sat down again. I watched Mark tap his foot faster and faster, his confidence leaking in small, jagged bursts. Every now and then he'd shoot a glance at Richard, like he expected a rescue that wasn't coming. When my name was called, the room went oddly still. I stood, walked to the front. Adrian didn't smile. He didn't soften his voice. He just tilted his head slightly, like he was asking a question that was already half answered. "Daniel," he said, "at the dinner last week you were seated near several of the individuals responsible for these accounts." I nodded. "Yes." "You overheard discussions about upcoming vendor renewals?" "Yes." "Any mention of cost adjustments?" I remembered the dinner more clearly now. Not just Mark's taunts, the conversations he was having with the man to his right. They'd discussed margins, inflated vendor expectations, ways to pad certain proposals to smooth transitions. I hadn't paid attention then. Now it all clicked. "There was talk about preloading fees," I said quietly, "and someone joked that accounting wouldn't notice a few extra zeros if the report had enough color." The room shifted. People leaned forward. Someone whispered, "Oh God." "Who said that?" Adrian asked. I didn't hesitate. "Mark." A breath escaped the room like air out of a balloon. Mark shot up from his chair. "This is bull." Adrian raised a hand. "Sit." Mark sat. It wasn't a request. "And at the end of that conversation," Adrian continued, "did he or anyone else mention adjusting signatures or speeding approvals?" I closed my eyes for a moment, replaying it. There it was. Mark's voice, half laughing, half drunk. "Just send it to Richard. He'll sign anything if you put it in the right binder." I opened my eyes. "Yes," I said. "He did." Richard went pale. The room erupted. Small gasps, exchanged glances, the soft thud of someone's pen hitting the table. Mark slammed his palm down. "You're twisting everything. It was drinks and jokes and—" "But that's the problem," Adrian said. "Your jokes matched the irregularities in our audit." Mark froze, stone still. Adrian turned to the room. "Everyone except Mark and Richard is excused." People left fast, trying not to make eye contact with anyone. When the door shut behind the last one, the air turned heavy, almost metallic. Mark tried to speak. Adrian cut him off. "We checked the logs," he said. "The signatures, the emails, the late-night approvals from your account." He stepped closer. "What we needed," he added, "was context. and Daniel provided it. Richard swallowed hard. Mark didn't breathe. And now, Adrian said, we move to the next phase. He dismissed me with a nod. Not dismissive, but deliberate, as if saying, you've done your part. Let me finish the rest. I stepped out of the conference room into the hallway. The door shut behind me. Silence. A long, uneasy silence. Then down the hall, a few voices started. One person asking what happened. Another saying my name with disbelief. A third whispering something that sounded like, he finally got him. My hands were shaking, not from fear, from the strange electric realization that the line between humiliation and power is thinner than I ever knew. They thought I was gone. I wasn't. I had just stopped playing their game, and that's the move they never see coming. The office felt different the next morning. Quieter, but not empty, like the air itself was waiting for something to drop. People didn't talk the way they usually did. They whispered. They watched doors. They watched me. Not openly, not rudely. More like someone checking the weather after weeks of pretending it didn't matter. I sipped my coffee and tried to focus on the screen, but my attention kept drifting to the conference hallway, the closed blinds, the soft echo of voices behind the glass. At some point, an HR rep walked past carrying a folder with the company seal, the kind they only use when paperwork is going to matter. I didn't know if Mark was in there, or Richard, or both. I didn't know how deep the audit went. I didn't know what decisions Adrian had already made. But I knew this much. The quiet before consequences always feels exactly the same. Weighted, thick, like the moment before a verdict. Around noon, an email hit the entire department. Mandatory all-hands meeting, conference room A, 12:15 p.m. Another message followed 30 seconds later. Attendance required. People rose from their desks like they were heading into a storm shelter. When I walked in, I saw Adrian at the front again, calm, focused, a still point in the room. Next to him stood the HR director. Stiff posture, clipped expression. Richard was off to the side, hands clasped, face tight. Mark wasn't there. The absence said enough. Everyone settled. The door closed. Adrian didn't waste time. Let's begin, he said. No preamble. No softening. We've concluded our audit on the contract discrepancies. The findings were clear. Significant vendor inflation was approved without proper authorization. Several documents were altered after submission, and a pattern of misconduct was traced to one individual. The room held its breath. Effective immediately, Adrian continued, Mark Hastings is terminated from the company and barred from corporate access pending legal review. A ripple went through the room, not loud but sharp, a mix of shock, relief, and the quiet satisfaction people feel when gravity finally pulls the right object down. Richard cleared his throat, looking nauseous. We regret. Adrian didn't let him finish. The second matter concerns oversight failures. Another pause. Richard, you will be stepping down as department head. Someone gasped. Someone else whispered, Oh my God. Richard's face collapsed inward, like a man who'd expected a slap and got a bullet instead. He tried to speak, but Adrian kept going. Your transition plan begins today. HR will coordinate your exit within the month. Richard looked at me then. Really looked. Not with anger. With the stunned recognition of a man realizing the ground under him had been shifting for far longer than he understood. Adrian continued, voice steady. Now, for the future of this department, we need someone who understands structure, integrity, and consistency. Someone who can work without seeking attention and who has demonstrated sound judgment, especially under pressure. I felt a flick of unease in my chest, like a heartbeat skipping. And after observing performance data, peer interactions, and compliance reports, he turned his head just slightly. The decision is clear. He met my eyes. Effective immediately, Daniel Reed will step in as interim project lead. Depending on performance during restructuring, the role may be made permanent. The room shifted around me. Chairs creaked. Someone murmured, Seriously? Someone else whispered, He deserves it. And I didn't know whose voice that was, but it mattered. I didn't smile. I didn't move. I just nodded. Thank you, I said quietly. Adrian gave a single nod back, the exact same small, grounded gesture he'd given me at that dinner, the quiet acknowledgement that had lingered under my skin ever since. The meeting ended. People approached me afterward, shaking hands, offering congratulations, some pretending they'd always believed in me. I accepted the sentiments without letting any of them rewrite history, because the truth was simple. None of them had defended me when it counted, and I no longer needed them to. Later, as the office thinned out, I stepped outside for air. The sky was gray, the kind of muted calm that looks empty until you appreciate its softness. I leaned against the railing and let out a breath I'd been holding since the night of the dinner, maybe longer. I didn't hear the footsteps behind me until someone stopped a few feet away. Quiet day, Adrian said. He wasn't a man who made small talk. I nodded. In some ways. He studied me the way he'd studied me at that restaurant, with precision but without judgment. You handled yourself well, he said. Most people would have lashed out at the dinner. That would have made my job harder. I exhaled slowly. It didn't feel like strength at the time. Strength rarely does, he replied. We stood there for a moment, the wind moving between us like a third voice. Then he added, For what it's worth, Daniel, you weren't chosen because Mark failed. You were chosen because you didn't. I let the words settle. He nodded once, turned, and walked back inside. I stayed outside a little longer, letting the quiet fill me. No applause, no dramatic music, just stillness, the kind that feels earned. People think justice comes with noise, with shouting, with revenge that leaves scorch marks. But real justice is quieter. It walks in at noon, announces itself in a steady voice, and leaves the room changed. Not because someone fought for the spotlight, but because the right truth finally landed where it needed to. I headed back inside, past the glass doors, past the same halls where I'd once blended into the walls. Not invisible anymore, not loud, just present, whole. Peace doesn't need applause. It only needs truth.